The sound of a door slamming echoed through the thin walls of the small apartment. Another dream shattered. Another hope crushed under the weight of bitter words. Have you ever watched someone you love destroy everything you built for them with your own hands? Welcome back. Tell me from which city you are watching me and what time it is there. Now, listen to this story. Maria Ramirez stood at her kitchen window, watching her 22-year-old son Alejandro storm down the cracked sidewalk. Her nurse scrubs hung loose on her tired frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She had worked a double shift at the hospital. Again. The college acceptance letter still sat on the kitchen table, crumpled, torn at the edges where Alejandro had grabbed it in rage 3 months ago. College is for rich kids, Mom. Stop living in fantasy land. Those words cut deeper than any scalpel she had ever seen in surgery. Alejandro kicked an empty soda can as he walked. The metallic clang rang out like a bell of defeat. He hated this neighborhood, hated the peeling paint on every house, hated the way Mrs. Rodriguez next door looked at him with pity, hated the smell of tamales that reminded him of everything he wanted to escape. Most of all, he hated how small his mother made him feel with her endless sacrifices. But Maria's diary, tucked away in an old wooden box above the kitchen shelf, held secrets that would change everything. Secrets about sacrifice, about love, about the truth behind every tear she had ever hidden. Alejandro didn't know it yet, but that diary would soon fall from its hiding place. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The story I'm about to tell you spans exactly 1 year. 12 months that would transform a family. 12 months that would teach a bitter young man what real strength looks like. It begins on a Tuesday morning in March when Alejandro came home from another failed job interview. They didn't even look at my resume, Mom. He threw his backpack onto the worn sofa, probably saw my address and decided I wasn't worth their time. Maria looked up from folding his clean clothes. She had been up since 4 in the morning doing laundry before her hospital shift. Her hands were red and raw from the harsh detergent. Maybe you could try the community center, she suggested softly. Sophia mentioned they're hiring for their youth program. Sophia. Alejandro's voice turned cold. That girl who thinks she can save the world one food drive at a time? That girl who graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to UCLA before coming back to help our community. The comparison stung. Alejandro felt something sharp twist in his chest. Pride, maybe, or shame. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. I don't need charity work, Mom. I need a real job, something that pays real money. Maria's fingers paused over his favorite shirt, the blue one she had bought him for graduation, back when they both believed he would walk across that stage and into a better life. Pride doesn't pay rent, mijo. The endearment hung in the air like a prayer, like a plea. But Alejandro was already walking away, already building walls around his wounded heart. That night Maria sat at her small kitchen table writing in her diary, the same wooden-covered journal she had kept for 15 years, through Carlos leaving. Through years of raising Alejandro alone, through every small victory and crushing defeat. Today Alejandro came home angry again. She wrote in her careful handwriting, I see so much of his father in him. The same pride that built walls between us. The same fear of appearing weak. But also the same capacity for love that he's afraid to show. She paused, pen hovering over the page. Sometimes I wonder if I failed him by protecting him too much. Or if I failed him by not protecting him enough from the truth about why his father really left. A sound made her look up. Alejandro was getting a glass of water from the kitchen. His movements were sharp, angry. When he reached for a clean glass from the high cabinet, he knocked against the wooden box where she kept her diary. The box shifted, tilted dangerously close to the edge. Maria held her breath. But the box stayed put. This time. The next morning brought news that would begin to crack the walls around Alejandro's heart. Sofia Mendoza knocked on their door at 8 a.m. She wore a bright yellow sundress and carried a clipboard thick with papers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. but her eyes sparkled with the kind of determination that moved mountains. "Mrs. Ramirez, I hope I'm not too early. I wanted to discuss the new single-parent support initiative we're proposing to the City Council." Maria invited her in with the warm hospitality that came as naturally as breathing. She poured coffee into her 2 good cups, the ones without chips. "Alejandro's here too," Maria said hopefully. "Maybe he could help with your project." From his bedroom came the sound of a door opening, then closing again, harder than necessary. Sophia's smile never wavered. "That's okay. This is important work whether he joins us or not." She spread papers across the kitchen table. Charts showing poverty statistics in their neighborhood, testimonials from single mothers struggling to make ends meet, photos of children who needed after-school programs while their parents worked multiple jobs. "The City Council meets next month," Sophia explained. "If we can show them how many families this would help, we might get funding for childcare, job training, even educational grants." Maria studied the papers with growing excitement. Finally, someone understood what she had been fighting for alone all these years. "How can I help?" "Share your story. Tell them what it's really like to raise a child on a nurse's salary, to choose between groceries and textbooks, to work nights so you can be there for school events during the day." Tears gathered in Maria's eyes. Someone finally saw her struggle, finally recognized the weight she carried every day. The bedroom door opened again. This time, Alejandro emerged. His hair was messy from sleep, and he wore an old t-shirt with holes in the sleeves. He looked younger than his 22 years, vulnerable in a way that made Maria's heart ache. "What's all this?" he asked, nodding toward the papers. Sophia looked up at him with eyes that held no judgment, only invitation. "Community organizing, fighting for families like yours? Like mine?" Alejandro's voice had an edge. "What do you know about families like mine? I know your mother works 16-hour days and still finds time to volunteer at the community center every Saturday. I know she paid for your college applications with money she should have spent on fixing her car. I know she believes in your potential even when you don't believe in it yourself." The silence that followed was thunderous. Maria watched her son's face cycle through emotions. Anger, surprise, something that might have been shame. "College applications are worthless when you can't afford tuition," he finally said. "That's exactly why we're fighting for educational grants." Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. She had clearly dealt with defensive young men before. "Look, Alejandro, your mom told me about your acceptance letters, about your plans to study business. Those dreams don't have to die just because the system is broken, but they will die if you give up completely." For a moment something flickered in Alejandro's eyes, a spark of the ambitious boy he used to be, the one who stayed up late writing essays and dreaming of office buildings and success. Then the walls slammed back up. "Dreams are for people who can afford them." He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Maria called after him. "Out." The door closed with devastating finality. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed Maria's hand. "He'll come around. Sometimes the people we're trying to help fight us the hardest at first, especially when they're scared." Scared of what? Of hoping again, of believing that things can actually change. Have you ever had someone try to help you when you were at your lowest point? Did you accept their help, or did you push them away because it felt too dangerous to hope? That afternoon, while Maria was at work and Alejandro was walking aimlessly through the neighborhood, something happened that would begin to shift the foundation of their small family. The wooden box above the kitchen shelf, already loosened from Alejandro's earlier collision, finally gave in to gravity. It fell. Not when anyone was watching. Not in a dramatic moment of revelation. Just quietly, inevitably, while dust motes danced in the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window. The box hit the floor with a soft thud. Its lid popped open, and Maria's diary spilled across the linoleum like scattered leaves. When Alejandro came home an hour later, he found pages of his mother's handwriting spread across the kitchen floor. Pages that held her secrets, her fears, her love. The temptation was too strong to resist. He knelt down and began to read. March 3rd, Alejandro turned down another job today. I want to shake him and tell him that pride is a luxury we cannot afford. But I remember being his age. Remember thinking that accepting help meant admitting defeat. Carlos was the same way. Too proud to ask his family for money when he lost his construction job. Too proud to admit he was drowning in debt until it was too late. Alejandro's hands trembled as he read. His mother had never told him his father lost his job before leaving, never mentioned any debts. He turned the page. March 10th, Mrs. Rodriguez asked me why I don't date anymore. How do I explain that I gave all my love to a man who left when things got hard, and now I save what's left for a son who seems determined to make the same mistakes? How do I tell her that I'm terrified if I let anyone else in, they'll see how close I am to falling apart? The pages blurred as Alejandro's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. March 15th. Alejandro criticized my tamales tonight at dinner, said they were too salty. He doesn't know I put extra salt in them to hide the taste of cheap ingredients. He doesn't know I buy the lowest quality meat so he can have name-brand cereal. He sees the final product and judges it without understanding the compromises that made it possible. A sob escaped Alejandro's throat before he could stop it. March 20th. I found Alejandro's college acceptance letter in the trash. I wanted to cry, but I was too exhausted. Instead, I sat at this kitchen table and wondered where I went wrong. Did I protect him too much from our struggles? Did I make him think success should come easy? Or did I fail to show him that falling down isn't the problem? Staying down is. Alejandro sat back on his heels, overwhelmed. Every page revealed another layer of sacrifice he had never noticed. Another moment when his mother had chosen his comfort over her own needs. March 25th. Elena brought me groceries today. She claims she bought too much, but I know she's worried about us, about me. I accepted them because Alejandro needs to eat, but I felt ashamed. 45 years old and still needing help from friends. Still choosing between gas money and dinner ingredients. Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything. The sound of a key in the front door made Alejandro panic. He quickly gathered the diary pages, but there were so many. Some had scattered under the refrigerator. Others had slid beneath the table. Maria's voice echoed from the entryway. Alejandro, are you home? Just a minute, he called back, frantically collecting the last few pages. He managed to stuff the diary back into its box and place it on the table just as his mother entered the kitchen. But his eyes were red-rimmed and his hands shook slightly as he pretended to search through the refrigerator. How was your day, mijo? The endearment that usually irritated him now felt like a gift. It was fine. Maria noticed the wooden box on the table. Oh, that old thing must have fallen. I need to find a better place for my papers. Mom! Alejandro's voice cracked. Tell me about Dad. Tell me the real reason he left. Maria froze. Her hand tightened on the grocery bag she was holding. Why do you want to know now? Because I'm tired of not understanding. Because I'm tired of being angry at shadows. Maria set down the groceries and looked at her son. Really looked at him. Saw the pain in his eyes that matched her own. Your father was proud, like you. When the construction company laid him off, he took out loans to keep paying rent, to keep buying you new shoes when you outgrew the old ones, to keep pretending everything was fine. She sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older than her 45 years. The debt kept growing. Men started coming to the house, threatening him, threatening us. Carlos thought if he left, they would follow him and leave us alone. Did they? Yes. But Carlos never came back either. Alejandro absorbed this information like a physical blow. All these years, he had assumed his father left because he didn't want the responsibility of a family. The truth was somehow worse. So he chose running over fighting. He chose protecting us over protecting his pride. At least that's what I choose to believe. That night, Alejandro lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The words from his mother's diary echoed in his mind. The truth about his father created new questions rather than answers. What would he do in the same situation? Would he stay and fight, even if it meant putting his family in danger? Or would he run, carrying the guilt, but believing it was for the greater good? For the first time in months, Alejandro began to question whether his anger had been justified, whether his bitterness was just another form of pride, whether his mother deserved better than the son he had become. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sophia stood on their doorstep again, but this time she wasn't holding papers. She was holding a box of pastries from the Mexican bakery down the street. "Peace offering," she said when Alejandro opened the door. "I thought maybe we could try this conversation again." Something had changed in her demeanor. The professional organizer was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely concerned. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about dreams being for people who can afford them." Alejandro stepped aside to let her in. His mother was already at work, pulling another double shift to cover for a colleague who called in sick. And I realized I was being unfair. I come from privilege even if I try to use it to help others. My parents paid for college. They had connections when I needed internships. It's easy for me to tell people to follow their dreams when I never had to choose between dreams and survival. The admission surprised Alejandro. He had expected another lecture about potential and responsibility. "So why are you here?" "Because I want to learn. I want to understand what it's actually like to grow up the way you did. And maybe, if you're willing, I want to find a way to make the system work for people like you instead of against them." Sophia's honesty was disarming. It stripped away Alejandro's defenses and left him unsure how to respond. "People like me? Smart people who got dealt a bad hand. People who have been told they can't succeed so many times they stopped believing they could. People whose talent is being wasted because the system is broken." She sat down at the kitchen table, in the same spot she had occupied the day before. But everything felt different now. The community center is hosting a job fair next month. Real jobs, not just volunteer work. I've been talking to local business owners about giving people second chances, about looking past addresses and credit scores to see actual potential. Alejandro remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "What's the catch?" "No catch. But I need help organizing it. I need someone who understands the barriers people face. Someone who can speak their language because he's lived their experience. You want me to help you help people like me. I want you to help yourself by helping others. Sometimes the best way out of a hole is to throw down a rope for the person behind you." For a long moment they stared at each other across the small kitchen. Alejandro could see his reflection in the window behind Sophia's head. He looked thin, tired, defeated. "What would I have to do?" "Show up, listen to people's stories, help them practice interviewing, maybe share your own story if you're comfortable." "My story? What story is that? College dropout comes home to live with his mom and complain about everything." "Your story is more than that, and you know it. You're the son of a single mother who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. You're someone who got accepted to college despite every disadvantage. You're someone who chose to come home instead of abandoning his family when things got hard." The words hit Alejandro like a physical force. He had never thought of his return home as a choice to stay rather than a failure to leave. "My mom told you too much. Your mom is proud of you, even when you're not proud of yourself." That afternoon, Alejandro found himself walking to the community center for the first time in years. The building looked smaller than he remembered from childhood, but it was clean and well-maintained. Colorful murals covered the exterior walls, depicting scenes of neighborhood life and cultural pride. Inside, Sophia was setting up chairs in the main room. She wore jeans and a community center t-shirt, looking less like a social worker and more like a neighbor. "You came," she said, smiling. "I'm not making any promises. I'm just checking it out. That's all I can ask." She handed him a stack of flyers advertising the job fair. "These need to go to every apartment complex, every laundromat, every place people might see them and think it's worth a try." Alejandro studied the bright yellow paper. "Second Chances Hiring Fair. It announced in bold letters. No perfect credit required, no perfect resume required. Just bring your best effort. Who are the employers? Local businesses that are tired of high turnover from employees who don't care about their work. They're willing to take chances on people who do care, even if they don't have traditional qualifications. As they walked through the neighborhood distributing flyers, Sophia pointed out changes Alejandro hadn't noticed. A new playground where an empty lot used to be, fresh paint on the apartment building where the Rodriguez family lived, a community garden where residents grew vegetables together. How long have you been working on all this? 2 years, since I came back from college. Why did you come back? You could have stayed in Los Angeles, gotten some high-paying job. Sophia stopped walking and looked at him directly. Because this is home. Because the people here are my people. Because running away from your problems doesn't solve them, it just makes them someone else's problems. The words carried an unmistakable message. Alejandro felt them like a gentle slap to his conscience. You think I'm running away? I think you're scared. I think you've been told you're not good enough so many times that you started believing it. I think you're afraid if you try and fail, it will prove everyone right. They had stopped in front of an elementary school. Children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying across the chain-link fence. What if they are right? Alejandro asked quietly. Then you try again, and again, until either you succeed or you die trying. But you don't quit before you start. That evening, Alejandro came home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted, still wearing her nurse scrubs from the hospital. But she was smiling as she sorted through a stack of thank you cards from patients. How was work, Mom? Something in his tone made her look up. He sounded different, less angry. Long but good, we saved a life today. A little girl who came in with breathing problems. Her parents were so scared, but we got her stable. That must feel amazing. It does. What about your day? Alejandro sat down across from her. For the first time in months, he really looked at his mother, noticed the deep lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward from exhaustion, the careful way she handled the thank you cards as if they were treasures. I helped Sophia distribute flyers for a job fair. Maria's eyes widened slightly. Oh? Nothing big, just walking around the neighborhood, but... He paused, struggling with words. Mom, why do you keep those thank you cards? Because sometimes you need reminders that your work matters, that you're making a difference, even when it doesn't feel like it. Do you ever regret it? Becoming a nurse instead of something that pays more? Maria folded her hands on the table. I regret a lot of things, mijo. I regret not finishing college when you were younger. I regret not standing up to your father before the debt got so bad. I regret not being able to give you everything you deserved. She reached across the table and touched his hand gently. But I never regret choosing work that helps people. I never regret having you. I never regret the sacrifices I made so you could have choices I never had. Tears burned behind Alejandro's eyes. What if I've wasted those sacrifices? What if I never amount to anything? Then you keep trying until you do. The only real failure is stopping. That night, Alejandro couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his mother's words, about the diary pages he had read, about Sophia's challenge to try again instead of giving up. Around midnight, he got up and went to the kitchen for water. The wooden box sat on the counter where his mother had left it. He knew he shouldn't look at the diary again. It was a violation of her privacy, but he needed to understand more. He opened the box carefully and found an entry from just a few days earlier. April 2nd. Alejandro seems different today. Softer somehow. I caught him looking at me the way he used to when he was little, like I was someone special instead of someone to endure. Maybe Sophia is having a good influence on him. Maybe there's hope for my boy after all. The words made his chest tight with emotion. April 3rd. I found myself humming while I made dinner tonight. When was the last time I hummed? Maybe when Alejandro got his first job at 16 and insisted on paying for groceries that week. Maybe when he graduated high school and wore the suit I bought him at the thrift store like it was designer. Small moments when I remembered why everything was worth it. Alejandro closed the diary carefully. His mother deserved better than a son who read her private thoughts. But those thoughts were teaching him things about himself he had never understood. The job fair was scheduled for the first Saturday in April. As the date approached, Alejandro found himself spending more time at the community center, helping Sofia organize paperwork, listening to people practice interview answers, slowly beginning to believe that maybe, possibly, things could change. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her 18-year-old daughter, whose dreams of college had been derailed by an unexpected pregnancy. Mr. Garcia, who had been laid off from the factory after 20 years, practiced explaining the gap in his employment history. Ms. Chen, a recent immigrant whose engineering degree wasn't recognized in the United States, worked on describing her skills in terms local employers would understand. Each person carried their own version of broken dreams and stubborn hope. "You're good at this," Sofia told Alejandro one afternoon as they cleaned up after a practice session. "At what?" "Listening. Making people feel heard. You have a way of talking to them that doesn't make them feel ashamed of their situations." Alejandro was quiet for a moment. "Maybe because I understand what it feels like to be ashamed of circumstances you can't control." "Is that how you felt? Ashamed?" "Every day. Ashamed that we lived in the poor part of town. Ashamed that my mom worked in a hospital but we couldn't afford to go to the doctor. Ashamed that my clothes came from thrift stores and my textbooks were falling apart. And now, I'm starting to think shame might be another luxury we can't afford." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the community center's front window, they could see a man arguing with someone on the sidewalk. Alejandro's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice. "I need to go," he said abruptly. "Alejandro, wait!" But he was already pushing through the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and something that might have been longing. Carlos Ramirez stood on the sidewalk, older than Alejandro remembered. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face was lined with the kind of weariness that came from carrying guilt for too long. "What are you doing here?" Alejandro's voice was harsh. Carlos turned, and for a moment father and son just stared at each other. 7 years of absence stretched between them like a canyon. "I heard you were home from college. I wanted to see you. I dropped out." "I know. How do you know?" Carlos shifted uncomfortably. I kept track, from a distance. I know about Maria's job at the hospital. I know about your acceptance letters. I know about the struggles." The admission hit Alejandro like a physical blow. "You've been watching us struggle and did nothing?" "I did what I thought was best." "You abandoned us." The words exploded out of Alejandro with years of accumulated pain. "You left Mom to raise me alone. You left her to work herself to death trying to be both parents." "I left because staying would have destroyed all of us. So destroying just Mom and me was the better option?" Carlos flinched as if he'd been slapped. "Every day I've been gone has been punishment. Every birthday I missed. Every graduation photo I didn't get to take. Every night I wondered if you were okay. Then why didn't you come back?" "Because by the time the debts were paid, by the time it was safe, too much time had passed. Because Maria deserved better than a man who ran when things got hard. Because you deserved better than a father who failed you." Alejandro felt tears building behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "You don't get to decide what we deserved. You don't get to make choices for us and then claim it was for our own good." "You're right," Carlos said quietly. "I don't get to decide, but I can try to make things right now." "How?" Carlos reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've been saving money. For your education. For Maria's future. For everything I should have provided all along." Alejandro stared at the envelope without taking it. "We don't need your money." "No, you don't. Maria raised an incredible son without any help from me. But maybe," Carlos's voice broke slightly, "maybe you could use it anyway. Not because you need it, but because I need to give it." The raw honesty in his father's voice caught Alejandro off guard. He looked at this man who had loomed so large in his anger for so many years, and saw someone smaller than he remembered. someone carrying his own burden of regret. I'm not ready to forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I learned from my mistakes. Sofia appeared at Alejandro's shoulder. She had been watching from inside the community center, giving them space but staying close in case he needed support. Everything okay out here? Carlos looked at her with curiosity. And you are? Sofia Mendoza. I'm working with your son on community organizing projects. Ah. Carlos smiled for the first time since the conversation began. So this is the young woman who got Alejandro involved in helping others. Alejandro got himself involved. I just provided the opportunity. The way she defended him, the pride in her voice when she spoke about his work, made something warm unfurl in Alejandro's chest. I should go, Carlos said. He held out the envelope again. Please, take this. If not for you, then for Maria. She's earned it 1,000 times over. This time, Alejandro took the envelope. It was heavier than expected. This doesn't fix anything, he said. I know. But maybe it's a start. Carlos walked away, leaving Alejandro standing on the sidewalk with Sofia beside him and 7 years of unresolved anger churning in his stomach. You okay? Sofia asked gently. I don't know. That evening, Alejandro sat at the kitchen table with the envelope unopened in front of him. Maria was working another late shift at the hospital. The apartment felt too quiet, too full of ghosts and might-have-beens. He opened the envelope. Inside was a bank check for $25,000. More money than he had ever seen at one time. Enough to pay for college, enough to fix their roof, enough to give his mother a break from working double shifts. There was also a letter, written in his father's careful handwriting. Alejandro, it began. I know money cannot undo the years I was absent. It cannot erase the struggles you and your mother faced because of my failures. But perhaps it can provide opportunities that my absence took away. I have followed your life from a distance, and I am proud of the man you are becoming. Your mother raised you to be everything I failed to be, responsible, caring, strong enough to stay when staying is hard. Use this money however you see fit. For education, for your mother's comfort, for the community work I hear you're doing. All I ask is that you remember. Running away is not the only option when life gets difficult. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay and fight. I hope someday you can forgive an old fool who learned important lessons too late to be the father you deserved. With love and regret, Carlos. Alejandro read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. His father had been watching, had been proud, had learned, even if the lessons came too late to prevent the damage. When Maria came home at midnight, she found Alejandro still sitting at the kitchen table. The check and letter were spread in front of him like evidence in a trial. Mijo, what's wrong? Dad came to see me today. Maria went very still. Carlos? Here? At the community center. He gave me this. He handed her the check. Maria stared at it with wide eyes. $25,000, she whispered. And a letter, apologizing, explaining. Maria sat down heavily in the chair across from him. What did you tell him? That I'm not ready to forgive him. But that I would think about what he said. And what did he say? That running away isn't the only option when life gets hard. That staying and fighting takes more courage. Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying her son's face in the dim kitchen light. Do you think he's right? I think maybe I've been running away in my own way. Instead of leaving town, I gave up on my dreams. Instead of facing my problems, I decided they were too big to solve. And now? Now I'm wondering what would happen if I stopped running, if I used this money to go back to school and actually tried to succeed instead of expecting to fail. Maria reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But, Alejandro, you don't need your father's money to prove you're worth something. You're already worth everything to me. The unconditional love in her voice broke something open in Alejandro's chest. All the walls he had built, all the anger he had nursed, all the pride that had kept him small and bitter, it cracked under the weight of his mother's faith in him. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I haven't been showing it very well lately. mijo. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. I've been waiting so long to hear you sound like yourself again. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the accumulated weight of love and loss, and the possibility of redemption. Outside, the neighborhood slept. Inside, a family began to heal. The next morning brought the job fair. Alejandro woke early and put on his best shirt, the blue one his mother had bought for his high school graduation. It still fit, though it was a little tight around the shoulders. He had grown in ways that weren't just physical. The community center buzzed with nervous energy. Local business owners set up tables with information about available positions. Job seekers clutched resumes and hope in equal measure. Sophia appeared at Alejandro's elbow, clipboard in hand and determination in her eyes. Ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be. Your mom's coming, right? She's working until noon, then she'll be here. Sophia smiled. Good. She should see what you've accomplished. What he had accomplished. 3 months ago, Alejandro would have laughed at the idea that helping organize a job fair counted as an accomplishment. Now he understood that small actions could create large changes, that believing in other people's potential was a way of believing in your own. The first hour went smoothly. Alejandro helped people fill out applications, practiced interview questions with nervous applicants, and watched connections form between employers and potential employees who might never have found each other otherwise. Then Mrs. Rodriguez approached his table with her daughter Carmen. Alejandro, I didn't know you were working here. The way she said it, with surprise and something that might have been approval, made him stand a little straighter. Just helping out. How's the job search going, Carmen? Carmen, who had always been shy, looked down at her hands. Not so good. Nobody wants to hire someone with a baby. Have you talked to Sophia? She knows which employers are family-friendly, which ones offer flexible schedules. You think it's worth trying? The hope in her voice reminded Alejandro of himself just a few months ago, wanting to believe things could change but afraid to get his hopes up. I think you'll never know unless you try, and trying feels better than giving up. As he helped Carmen practice describing her skills, Alejandro realized he was no longer just mouthing platitudes. He believed what he was saying. Somewhere in the process of helping others, he had begun to help himself. At noon, Maria arrived still wearing her hospital scrubs. She stopped in the doorway of the community center, taking in the scene. Her son talking animatedly with job seekers, Sophia coordinating with employers, the energy of hope and possibility filling the room. Mrs. Ramirez. One of the employers, a middle-aged woman who owned a local accounting firm, waved her over. I've been hoping to meet you. Me? Your son has been telling everyone about his mother, the nurse. About your dedication to helping people. We need someone with your organizational skills and people experience to manage our client services department. Maria looked confused. But I don't have accounting experience. We can train you in the technical aspects. What we can't train is integrity and work ethic. Alejandro says you have both in abundance. Alejandro appeared at his mother's side, beaming with pride. Mom, this is Mrs. Patterson. She's offering you a job with regular hours, health insurance, and a salary that's 20% more than what you make at the hospital. Maria stared at her son, then at Mrs. Patterson, then back at her son. You recommended me? I told her the truth. That you're the hardest working person I know, that you care about people, that any company would be lucky to have you. For a moment, Maria couldn't speak. When was the last time someone had advocated for her the way she had always advocated for everyone else? I would need to give 2 weeks' notice at the hospital. Of course, Mrs. Patterson said. We want you to do this right. Leave on good terms. Start fresh with us when you're ready. That evening, the Ramirez family sat around their kitchen table sharing takeout Chinese food, a luxury they rarely allowed themselves. The job fair had been a success beyond anyone's expectations. 12 people had received job offers, 5 more had second interviews scheduled, and Maria had the opportunity for a new career that would give her back some of the life she had sacrificed for others. I'm proud of you, mijo, Maria said, raising her cup of tea in a toast. Today you made a real difference in people's lives. We made a difference, Alejandro corrected. This was a team effort. Speaking of team efforts, Maria said carefully, what have you decided about your father's offer? Alejandro had been thinking about it all day. The check still sat on the kitchen counter, uncashed but not forgotten. I want to use part of it to go back to school, but not all of it. I want to put some aside for you, in case you decide you don't like the new job. I want to donate some to the community center for more programs like this one. And the rest? I want to start a scholarship fund for kids like me who get accepted to college but can't afford to go. Kids whose dreams get derailed by circumstances they didn't choose. Maria's eyes filled with tears. That's a beautiful idea. I learned it from you. You've been investing in my dreams your whole adult life. Now it's time for me to invest in other people's dreams. That night, Alejandro lay in bed thinking about the future for the first time in months. Tomorrow he would call the community college admissions office and ask about re-enrolling for the summer semester. He would start with business basics while working part-time at the community center. It wasn't the grand plan he had imagined at 18, but it was a real plan, a sustainable plan, a plan that honored both his dreams and his responsibilities. From the kitchen came the soft sound of his mother writing in her diary. He no longer felt tempted to read it. Some privacy was worth preserving. Some secrets were meant to remain secret, but he hoped that tonight's entry would be happier than the ones he had read before. He hoped she was writing about pride instead of worry, about hope instead of fear. The scholarship fund became Alejandro's passion project over the following months. Working with Sophia and the community center, he created an application process that looked beyond grades and test scores to identify students with genuine potential and real need. The first recipient was Carmen Rodriguez, who had been accepted to the local community college's early childhood education program, but couldn't afford tuition and childcare. This changes everything for me and my daughter, she told Alejandro when he presented her with the scholarship check. Thank you for seeing potential where other people saw problems. I saw someone who reminded me of myself, Alejandro replied. Someone who just needed a chance to prove what she could do. By fall, the scholarship fund had grown beyond his father's initial contribution. Other community members had donated. Local businesses had sponsored students. What started as one man's attempt at redemption had become a community investment in its own future. Maria thrived in her new job. The regular hours gave her energy she hadn't had in years. The better salary allowed her to fix their roof and buy a reliable car. For the first time since Carlos left, she began talking about her own dreams, maybe taking evening classes to finish her bachelor's degree. I want to show you that it's never too late to grow, she told Alejandro. That dreams deferred aren't necessarily dreams destroyed. Alejandro's relationship with his father remained complicated. They met for coffee once a month, awkward conversations that gradually became easier as they learned who each other had become during their years apart. I made terrible mistakes, Carlos said during one of these meetings. I let pride and fear make my decisions instead of love and wisdom. We all make mistakes, Alejandro replied. The question is whether we learn from them. What have you learned? Alejandro considered the question seriously. I learned that running away looks different for different people. Some people physically leave. Some people emotionally withdraw. Some people give up on their dreams. But they're all forms of running. And what's the alternative? Staying put, facing problems instead of avoiding them, asking for help instead of pretending you don't need it, building something better instead of just complaining about what's wrong. Carlos nodded slowly. You sound like your mother. Good. She's the smartest person I know. By spring, almost a year after the job fair that changed everything, Alejandro was halfway through his business degree and planning to transfer to a 4-year university. But he was also planning to stay in the neighborhood, to keep working with the community center, to keep investing in local dreams. You could go anywhere now, Sophia pointed out as they worked together on plans for the second annual job fair. You have the grades, the recommendations, the financial resources. You could transfer to UCLA or USC. I could, Alejandro agreed, but I don't want to. Why not? Because this is where the work is. This is where I can make the biggest difference. This is home." Sophia smiled. Somewhere in the process of working together, their partnership had deepened into something more personal, something that felt like love. "Is that the only reason you want to stay?" "No," Alejandro admitted. "It's not the only reason." The second job fair was even more successful than the first. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood. People came from across the city to participate. Local news covered the event. City council members attended to see what all the excitement was about. Maria worked the registration table, greeting participants with the warmth that made everyone feel welcome. She wore a new dress for the occasion, the first new dress she had bought in years. "I'm so proud of what you've built here," she told Alejandro during a quiet moment. "What we've built," he corrected. "None of this would exist without your example, without your sacrifice, without your faith in me when I didn't have faith in myself." "Speaking of faith," Maria said with a sly smile, "when are you going to ask Sophia to be more than just your work partner?" Alejandro blushed. Despite being 23 now, some conversations with his mother still made him feel like a teenager. "Soon," he promised. "Good. She's perfect for you. Strong enough to challenge you, kind enough to support you, smart enough to keep you on your toes." That evening, after the job fair ended and the community center was cleaned up, Alejandro and Sophia walked through the neighborhood together. The same streets that once felt like a prison now felt like possibility. "Do you ever regret coming back from UCLA?" Alejandro asked. "Never." "Do you ever regret not leaving for college somewhere else?" "Never." They stopped at the elementary school playground where they had first talked about fear and potential. The swings moved gently in the evening breeze. "Sophia," Alejandro began, then paused, suddenly nervous. "Yes?" "I love you. I love your passion for justice. I love your belief that people can change. I love the way you see potential where others see problems. I love that you came home to make a difference instead of leaving to make a fortune." Sophia's face lit up with joy. "I love you too, Alejandro. I love that you chose growth over bitterness. I love that you turned your pain into purpose. I love that you stayed when staying was hard." As they kissed under the streetlights of the neighborhood they both called home, Alejandro thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago he had been angry, bitter, convinced that life was stacked against him. Now he understood that life was difficult for everyone, but some people chose to fight the difficulty while others surrendered to it. The difference wasn't talent or luck or even opportunity. The difference was deciding that other people's dreams mattered as much as your own pain. The difference was choosing connection over isolation, growth over stagnation, hope over despair. 6 months later, Alejandro graduated from community college with full honors and a job offer from a nonprofit organization that specialized in community economic development. The graduation ceremony was small, held in the same community center where everything had started. Maria sat in the front row, wearing the dress she had bought for the job fair and a smile that could have powered the entire neighborhood. Elena sat beside her, along with Mrs. Rodriguez and Carmen and a dozen other community members who had become extended family. Carlos sat in the back, still maintaining respectful distance, but no longer completely absent. Progress, Alejandro had learned, often came in small steps rather than dramatic leaps. Sophia sat with the other community center staff, beaming with pride and wearing the engagement ring Alejandro had given her the week before. They planned to marry in the fall, after he started his new job, after she finished her graduate degree in social work. "Today we celebrate not just Alejandro's graduation," Sophia said when she took the microphone to speak, "but the graduation of our entire community from the belief that circumstances determine destiny." Alejandro proved that with enough support, anyone can overcome their challenges and achieve their dreams. "But more importantly," she continued, "he proved that success means more than personal achievement. Real success means using your growth to help others grow, using your opportunities to create opportunities, using your voice to speak for those who haven't found theirs yet." After the ceremony, as the community center filled with the sounds of celebration, laughter and conversation in English and Spanish, children playing, Music from someone's phone. Alejandro found himself standing next to his mother. "So, what's next?" Maria asked. "Next, I start my job helping other communities build their own economic development programs. Next, Sophia and I get married and start planning our own family. Next, we keep growing, keep learning, keep believing that things can get better if we're willing to work for it. And your father?" Alejandro looked across the room at Carlos, who was talking quietly with Elena about something that made them both smile. "Next, we keep taking it slow, keep building trust, keep remembering that forgiveness is a process, not an event. I'm proud of how you've handled all of this, mijo. The hurt, the healing, the hard choices. You've become the man I always hoped you would be. I became the man you raised me to be, even when I was fighting it, even when I was too angry to see it. You never stopped believing in me, even when I stopped believing in myself." Maria patted his cheek gently, the same gesture she had used when he was a little boy with scraped knees and hurt feelings. "That's what mothers do. We see who you really are, even when you forget." As the evening went on, Alejandro found himself thinking about one of the last entries he had read in his mother's diary, over a year ago now. The one where she wondered if she had failed him by protecting him too much or protecting him too little from the truth. Now he understood that she hadn't failed him at all. She had given him exactly what he needed: unconditional love, unwavering support, and the freedom to make his own mistakes and learn his own lessons. The truth wasn't something she could have taught him. It was something he had to discover for himself through struggle and growth, and the gradual understanding that strength came not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with grace. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the community center was quiet, Alejandro and Sophia sat on the front steps, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. "Do you think we'll still be here in 10 years? Sophia asked. "Probably. Do you mind?" "No. I think there's something beautiful about choosing to bloom where you're planted instead of always looking for better soil somewhere else." Alejandro thought about his journey from bitter college dropout to community leader, about his mother's journey from exhausted single parent to thriving professional, about his father's journey from absent failure to healing presence. All of their growth had happened right here, in this neighborhood that some people would dismiss as too poor, too small, too ordinary to matter. But it was precisely because the neighborhood was overlooked that it needed champions. It was precisely because the people were written off that they needed advocates. "Sophia," Alejandro said, "do you believe in destiny?" "I believe in choice. I believe we create our own destiny by deciding, every single day, who we want to be and how we want to treat other people. What if I had made different choices? What if I had stayed bitter? What if I had taken my father's money and used it to run away instead of staying to help? Then you would have become a different person, and I would have fallen in love with someone else, and this community would have missed out on everything you've contributed." "No pressure," Alejandro laughed. "The best kind of pressure. The pressure that comes from knowing your choices matter, from knowing that people are counting on you to be your best self." As they sat together in the comfortable darkness, Alejandro reflected on the question that had haunted him for so long. What made the difference between people who overcame their circumstances and people who were defeated by them? The answer, he realized, wasn't talent or luck or even opportunity. The answer was community. The answer was having people who believed in your potential even when you couldn't see it yourself. The answer was understanding that your individual success was connected to everyone else's success. His mother had been his first community, sacrificing everything to give him chances she never had. Sophia had been his second community, challenging him to see beyond his own pain to other people's needs. The neighborhood had become his third community, teaching him that real strength came from lifting others up rather than climbing over them. And now he was part of someone else's community, helping other young people discover their own potential, make their own choices, create their own destinies. The cycle continued, hope building on hope, dreams supporting dreams, love multiplying love. In the quiet of that spring evening, with Sophia's hand in his and his future stretching out bright with possibility, Alejandro finally understood what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. that the measure of a life wasn't what you achieved for yourself, but what you made possible for others. That real success wasn't escaping your circumstances, but transforming them. Not leaving your community behind, but bringing your community forward. That love, for family, for neighbors, for strangers who needed a chance, was not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be shared. The diary that had started his transformation still sat in the wooden box in their kitchen. But now Maria wrote different entries. Entries about hope instead of worry, about pride instead of exhaustion, about dreams coming true in ways she never could have imagined. And sometimes, when she wasn't writing about the present, she wrote letters to the future. Letters to the grandchildren she hoped to have someday. Letters to the young people who would receive scholarships from the fund her son had created. Letters to the version of herself she was still becoming, even at 46 years old. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize your struggles weren't punishments, but preparation? When you understand that your pain wasn't meaningless, but the raw material for your purpose? As Alejandro looked around at everything he and his community had built together, the job fairs and scholarship funds, the new relationships and healed families, the simple but profound understanding that everyone deserved a chance to succeed, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts, because without the pain, he never would have developed empathy for other people's suffering. Without the struggle, he never would have appreciated the value of support and encouragement. Without the fear of failure, he never would have learned the courage required to try again. His story wasn't unique. Every day, in communities across the world, people were making the same choice he had made: to stay instead of run, to build instead of tear down, to hope instead of despair. Every day, mothers were sacrificing for their children's futures. Young people were discovering that their circumstances didn't define their possibilities. Families were learning to forgive old hurts and build new connections. The work continued, the hope multiplied, the love spread. And in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood in Southern California, a family slept peacefully, surrounded by the dreams they had built together and the larger dreams still waiting to be born. 2 years later, on a warm Saturday morning in May, Alejandro stood at the podium of the community center's main hall. But this time, the occasion was different. The room was filled with folding chairs arranged in neat rows, decorated with white ribbons and spring flowers that Sophia had insisted on despite their modest budget. Maria sat in the front row wearing a navy blue dress that made her look younger than her 48 years. Her hair was styled professionally for the occasion, and she wore a corsage of white roses that Carlos had somewhat nervously presented to her before the ceremony began. Carlos himself sat 2 seats away from Maria, close enough to be included, far enough to respect the boundaries they were still navigating. The years had softened some of the sharp edges of their shared history, but healing, Alejandro had learned, was not a destination, but an ongoing journey. Family, friends, and neighbors, Alejandro began, his voice strong despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Thank you for being here as Sophia and I begin this new chapter of our lives together. He looked out at the assembled crowd and saw the story of his transformation reflected in their faces. Mrs. Rodriguez sat with Carmen, who was now in her 2nd year of college and working part-time at a local preschool. Mr. Garcia had found steady employment at a manufacturing company that valued his experience over his resume gaps. Ms. Chen was using her engineering background at a firm that had learned to recognize international credentials. Each person represented a connection forged through shared struggle and mutual support. Each relationship had taught him something new about resilience, community, and the countless ways that love could manifest itself. When I first met Sophia, Alejandro continued, I was convinced that my circumstances defined my possibilities. I had built walls around my heart so high that I couldn't see beyond my own pain to recognize the potential for joy, for growth, for the kind of love that makes you want to become the best version of yourself. Sophia stood beside him in a simple white dress that she had found at a consignment shop and altered herself. Her eyes shone with tears of happiness, and when she smiled at him, Alejandro felt the same sense of wonder that had struck him the first time she challenged him to see beyond his limitations. "Sofia taught me that real love isn't just about finding someone who accepts you as you are," he said. "It's about finding someone who sees who you could become and loves both versions, the person you've been and the person you're growing into." The officiant, Pastor Martinez from the small church where Maria still attended Sunday services when her work schedule allowed, stepped forward to guide them through their vows. "Alejandro," Sofia said when it was her turn to speak, "I promise to support your dreams even when they seem impossible. I promise to challenge you when you're settling for less than you deserve. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our individual growth and our shared commitment to lifting up our community. I promise to love not just you, but the work we do together, the family we create together, the future we're building for the children in this neighborhood who need to see that dreams don't have expiration dates if you're willing to fight for them." When Alejandro spoke his vows, his voice carried across the room with the same conviction that had gradually replaced his earlier bitterness. "Sofia, I promise to love you with the same fierce loyalty my mother taught me. I promise to support your dreams with the same dedication you've shown to everyone else's. I promise to build a family with you that serves as proof that love multiplies when it's shared rather than hoarded. I promise to never take for granted the gift of partnership, the blessing of someone who chooses to walk beside me through whatever challenges and celebrations lie ahead." As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that they had chosen together at a jewelry store downtown, Alejandro caught sight of his father wiping tears from his eyes. Carlos had been learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, what it meant to be present for the moments that mattered. The reception was held in the community center's fellowship hall, decorated with more flowers and string lights that Sofia's mother had contributed to the celebration. The menu featured dishes from a potluck that had turned into a neighborhood feast: Maria's tamales alongside Mrs. Rodriguez's mole, Elena's tres leches cake sharing table space with contributions from families representing the community's growing diversity. As the evening progressed and Alejandro danced with his new wife to a song playing from a borrowed sound system, he found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with his mother earlier that week. "I never imagined I'd get to see this day," Maria had said as she helped him choose a tie for the ceremony. "There were years when I worried you'd closed your heart so completely that love might never find its way in. What changed your mind?" "Watching you learn to love the community. Watching you invest in other people's dreams. Love isn't something that happens to you, mijo. It's something you practice, and you've been practicing for years now, even when you didn't realize it." Now, as he held Sofia close and listened to the sounds of celebration around them, laughter echoing off the community center walls, children playing between the tables, conversations flowing in English and Spanish, Alejandro understood what his mother had meant. Love was indeed a practice. A daily choice to see the best in people, to invest in their potential, to believe that everyone deserved chances, support, and the kind of encouragement that could transform a life. The scholarship fund had grown beyond anything he had originally imagined. With Sofia's help in writing grants and organizing fundraisers, they had been able to support 23 students in the past 2 years. But more importantly, they had created a model that other communities were beginning to replicate. Just the previous month, Alejandro had received a call from a community organizer in Oakland who wanted to learn about their approach to combining job fairs with educational support. The week before that, someone from a neighborhood in Phoenix had reached out about starting their own scholarship program. "We're going to change the world," Sofia had said after that second call. "One community at a time." "Or maybe," Alejandro had replied, "we're going to prove that the world changes when people decide to change themselves first." The dancing continued late into the evening, with Sofia's younger cousins teaching the older guests new moves, while Elena provided commentary and encouragement from her seat at the head table. Carlos had surprised everyone by asking Maria to dance to one slow song, a tentative gesture toward healing that she had accepted with grace, if not quite forgiveness. As midnight approached and the celebration began to wind down, Alejandro found himself outside the community center's front doors, looking up at the same stars he and Sophia had contemplated during their courtship. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Sophia asked, joining him on the front steps. "Thinking grateful thoughts. Thinking about how many times I almost missed all of this by convincing myself I didn't deserve it. But you didn't miss it. That's what matters." "We didn't miss it," he corrected. "Everything good that's happened has been a team effort." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their neighbors cleaning up inside, already planning their next collaborative effort. The third annual job fair was scheduled for the summer, and they had ideas for a financial literacy program that would help people navigate the path from employment to economic stability. "Can I tell you a secret?" Sophia said. "Always. I used to worry that love would distract me from the work, that caring too much about one person would make me care less about everyone else. And now? Now I think loving you has made me love everything more. Our neighbors, our community, the possibility that two people who choose each other can create something bigger than either of them could build alone." Alejandro thought about the scholarship recipients who had become like extended family, the job fair participants who stopped by the community center to share updates on their progress, the network of relationships that had grown from their initial efforts to help a few people find work. "I think," he said slowly, "that might be the secret to everything. That love isn't a finite resource that gets depleted when you share it. It's more like a skill that gets stronger with practice." "Is that your professional opinion, Mr. Community Development Coordinator?" "That's my personal experience, Mrs. Community Development Coordinator." Sophia laughed at the new title they would now share at the nonprofit organization that had hired them both. The agency had been so impressed with their collaborative approach that they had created a position specifically designed to utilize both of their skills. As they finally stood to go home to their small apartment 2 blocks away, the same building where Alejandro had grown up, though they now rented the unit downstairs from his mother, Sophia paused at the community center's front door. "Thank you," she said, placing her hand flat against the building's exterior wall. "Thank you for what?" "For being the place where everything started. For giving us space to discover who we could become together." Alejandro placed his hand over hers, feeling the slight warmth that the building still retained from the day's sunshine. "Thank you for being patient with a stubborn young man who thought his circumstances were stronger than his possibilities. Thank you for proving that the most radical thing you can do is refuse to give up on yourself or your community." As they walked home through the quiet neighborhood streets, past the elementary school where they had first talked about fear and potential, past the apartments where many of their scholarship recipients lived, past the small businesses that had provided jobs to their job fair participants, Alejandro felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. This was not the life he had imagined at 18, when success seemed to require escaping everything familiar in pursuit of something bigger and better somewhere else. But it was a life built on foundation so solid that it could support not just his own dreams, but the dreams of everyone around him. The next morning, Alejandro woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of his mother moving around in the kitchen above them. Some traditions, he had learned, were worth preserving even as everything else evolved. He found Sophia at their small dining table, already dressed for the day and reviewing applications for the summer scholarship awards. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail she had worn to their first meeting, but now she wore his grandmother's wedding ring alongside her own. "Any interesting applications?" he asked, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "All of them are interesting. This young woman wants to study nursing like your mom. This one is interested in business management. This guy wants to become a teacher and come back to work in the local schools. What do they all have in common? They all understand that education isn't just about personal advancement. It's about gaining the tools to contribute to something larger than themselves." Alejandro poured himself coffee from the pot Sophia had made and sat down across from her. Through their kitchen window, he could see children playing in the courtyard of their apartment complex, their laughter providing a soundtrack of hope for the day ahead. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly. Always. Do you ever feel like we're limiting ourselves by staying here, by focusing our energy on one community instead of trying to make a broader impact?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same seriousness she brought to everything important. Do you remember the story your mom used to tell about the starfish? The one about the man throwing starfish back into the ocean. Someone tells him he can't possibly save them all, so what's the point? And he picks up another starfish, throws it back, and says, "It made a difference to that one." I remember. I think impact isn't about how many people you reach. It's about how deeply you reach the people in front of you. It's about creating changes that ripple outward in ways you might never fully understand. She gestured toward the scholarship applications spread across their table. Each of these young people will go on to touch other lives. Some of them will become teachers, nurses, business owners, community leaders. Some of them will have children who grow up believing college is possible because their parents proved it was possible. So you don't think we're thinking too small. I think we're thinking at exactly the right scale. The scale where we can know people's names and stories. The scale where we can see the results of our work and adjust our approach based on what we learn. The scale where love can be personal instead of abstract. That afternoon, they walked to the community center to begin setup for a financial literacy workshop they were hosting that weekend. The building that had once seemed too small for Alejandro's dreams now felt like the perfect size for the work they were building together. As they arranged chairs and tested the microphone they would use for presentations, Alejandro noticed a new addition to the community center's bulletin board. Someone had posted a flyer for a community garden planning meeting, illustrated with hand-drawn vegetables and printed on bright green paper. "Did you know about this?" he asked Sophia. "Mrs. Chen mentioned it last week. She wants to start a garden where people can grow their own food and learn about nutrition. She's organizing it completely independently." "That's amazing. It's what happens when you teach people they have the power to solve their own problems instead of just helping them solve this one problem." Alejandro studied the flyer more closely, noting the contact information and meeting time. "We should go to the planning meeting. See if there's any way to support what she's doing." "Absolutely. But as participants, not organizers. She doesn't need us to take over her project. She just needs us to show up and offer our help if she wants it." This distinction between leading and supporting, between creating dependency and fostering independence, had become central to their approach over the past 2 years. Alejandro remembered his initial tendency to want to solve everyone's problems, and Sophia's patient guidance in helping him understand that sustainable change required empowering people to solve their own problems. "You've taught me so much about this work," he said. "We've taught each other. That's how partnerships work." As the evening's workshop attendees began arriving, Alejandro felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that came with any educational program. Tonight's topic, understanding credit scores and building financial stability, was practical but not necessarily glamorous. Yet he had learned that some of the most transformative work happened in the most ordinary moments. Maria arrived early, as she often did when they hosted workshops at the community center. She wore her hair in a new style and carried herself with the confidence that had grown steadily since she started her job at the accounting firm. "How was work today, Mom?" Alejandro asked as she helped them arrange materials on each table. "Busy but good. Mrs. Patterson announced that we're expanding our client services department. She wants me to help hire and train 2 new people. That's fantastic. I never imagined I'd be in a position to give someone else the kind of opportunity she gave me. It feels full circle." Full circle. Alejandro liked that phrase. It captured something essential about the way individual healing contributed to community healing, which in turn created more opportunities for individual growth. The workshop participants included several familiar faces, people who had found jobs through their job fairs and wanted to build on their employment success, along with newer community members who were just beginning to engage with the center's programming. As Sophia began the presentation with an overview of credit scores and their impact on everything from housing to employment, Alejandro noticed how the participants leaned forward, eager to absorb information that could change their financial futures. "The most important thing to understand," Sophia was saying, "is that your current credit score is not permanent. It's a snapshot of your financial behavior at this moment in time. And like any behavior, it can be changed with knowledge, planning, and consistent effort." One participant, A young woman named Isabella, who had recently found work through their job fair, raised her hand. I made some mistakes when I was younger. Credit cards I couldn't pay, medical bills that went to collections. Is it really possible to fix all that? It's not only possible, it's exactly what this program is designed to help you do, Sophia replied. And you're not starting from zero. You're starting from employment, which means you have income to work with. You're starting from knowledge, which means you understand why this matters. You're starting from community, which means you have support as you make these changes. As the workshop continued, Alejandro watched the faces of the participants transform from skeptical to hopeful. He recognized the progression because he had lived it himself. The gradual understanding that circumstances could be changed, that systems could be navigated, that support made seemingly impossible challenges manageable. After the formal presentation ended and people began working on individual credit assessments, Alejandro found himself talking with Isabella about her longer-term goals. "I want to buy a house someday," she said. "Nothing fancy, just something small that belongs to me. My daughter Sophia is 6 now, and I want her to grow up knowing that we have a permanent home. That's a beautiful goal. What feels like the biggest obstacle right now? The down payment, mostly. Even if I fix my credit, I don't know how I'll ever save enough money for a down payment while paying rent and daycare and everything else." Alejandro nodded, recognizing the challenge that faced so many working families. Being financially stable enough to survive month to month, but not stable enough to build the savings that would enable long-term security. "Have you heard about individual development accounts?" he asked. "No, what are those?" "They're savings programs where every dollar you save gets matched by additional funds, sometimes dollar for dollar, sometimes even more. They're specifically designed to help working families build assets like home ownership or education." That sounds too good to be true. I understand the skepticism, but these are real programs with real funding. Sophia and I have been researching them as a possible addition to our services here. Maybe you'd be interested in being part of a pilot group to test how they might work in our community. Isabella's face lit up with the kind of hope that Alejandro had learned to recognize as the beginning of transformation. "You would really do that? Create a new program? We would really research whether it's feasible and how it might work best for people in situations like yours. The community tells us what they need, and we try to figure out how to provide it." As the workshop concluded and participants began to leave, many stopping to schedule individual follow-up appointments, Alejandro reflected on how much their approach had evolved since those early days of organizing job fairs. They had learned to listen first and plan second, to ask what people needed rather than assume they knew, to create programs that built on community strengths rather than focusing only on deficits. Most importantly, they had learned that sustainable change required not just addressing immediate needs, but creating pathways for people to address their own future needs. "Good workshop tonight," Sophia said as they packed up materials and turned off lights. "I think we need to seriously research those individual development accounts. If we could help people build savings for home ownership or business startup costs." I was thinking the same thing. "Want to divide up the research? I can look into funding sources, you can research program models." "Perfect. Although..." Alejandro paused at the community center's front door, looking back at the room where so many important conversations had taken place over the past few years. "Although what?" "I keep thinking about what my dad said in that letter, about staying and fighting being braver than running away." "What about it?" "I'm starting to understand that staying doesn't mean staying exactly the same. We've stayed in this neighborhood, but everything else has grown and changed. Our programs, our approach, our capacity, our impact. Maybe that's what real stability looks like," Sophia suggested. "Not staying static, but staying rooted while continuing to grow." As they walked home through the familiar neighborhood streets, Alejandro noticed changes that had accumulated gradually over their years of work. Streetlights that had been repaired, sidewalks that had been patched, a new bus stop that made public transportation more accessible. Small changes, individually insignificant, but collectively representing a community that was investing in its own future. Their apartment building came into view, and Alejandro could see lights on in his mother's kitchen window. She would be finishing her evening routine, cleaning up from dinner, preparing clothes for tomorrow's work, maybe writing in the diary that had inadvertently started his journey toward healing. "Do you think," he asked Sophia as they climbed the stairs to their front door, "that our children will grow up here too? Do you want them to? I want them to grow up somewhere that teaches them about community, about the importance of knowing your neighbors and caring about their struggles and celebrating their successes." "Then yes," Sophia said, unlocking their door. "I think they probably will." That night, as Alejandro lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of their neighborhood, cars passing on the street outside, the distant hum of the bus line, someone's music playing softly through thin apartment walls, he thought about the question that had once haunted him. What made the difference between people who overcame their circumstances and people who were defeated by them? The answer, he now understood, was not individual strength or exceptional talent or even extraordinary or opportunity. The answer was recognition that circumstances were not permanent conditions, but temporary challenges that could be addressed through collective effort. His mother had demonstrated that truth through her years of sacrifice and determination. Sophia had embodied it through her decision to return home and fight for her community's potential. The scholarship recipients proved it every semester as they balanced work and study and family responsibilities in pursuit of their educational goals. And now Alejandro and Sophia would have the chance to teach that truth to their own children someday, not through lectures or abstract discussions, but through the daily example of choosing to build rather than abandon, to invest rather than exploit, to love rather than fear. 3 years after their wedding, on another warm Saturday morning in May, Alejandro stood once again at the podium of the community center's main hall. But this time he was not making vows. He was delivering a presentation to a room full of community development professionals from across the state. The Individual Development Account Program had exceeded everyone's expectations. In its first year, 20 families had successfully completed the financial literacy training and begun building matched savings toward home ownership, business startup costs, or educational expenses. Isabella had been among the first graduates, purchasing a small 2-bedroom house just 4 blocks from the community center. At the closing, she had cried tears of joy while 6-year-old Sophia ran through their new home claiming bedrooms and making plans for decorating. The key insight, Alejandro was explaining to his audience, was understanding that asset-building programs work best when they're embedded within comprehensive community support systems. Financial literacy education is essential, but it's not sufficient by itself. Sophia, now visibly pregnant with their first child, sat in the front row along with Maria and several of their program participants who had agreed to share their experiences with the visiting professionals. People need mentorship, peer support, child care assistance, flexible scheduling, and celebration of milestones along the way. Most importantly, they need to see other people from their community succeeding with similar goals. One of the visitors, a woman from a nonprofit organization in Sacramento, raised her hand. "How do you balance supporting individual success with building community capacity? How do you prevent brain drain as people achieve upward mobility?" It was a question they had grappled with from the beginning, and Alejandro appreciated its complexity. "That's where the community rootedness becomes crucial," he replied. "We don't measure success by how many people leave the neighborhood. We measure it by how many people choose to stay and invest their success back into community improvement." He gestured toward Isabella, who had agreed to be part of the panel discussion. Isabella now owns her own home, but she also volunteers as a mentor for other families in our asset building program. She understands firsthand what the barriers are and how to navigate them. Isabella stood briefly to address the audience. "I could have used my improved credit score and down payment assistance to buy a house in a different neighborhood," she said. "But this community supported me when I was struggling. Now I want to be part of supporting the next family that's working toward home ownership. The result," Sophia added, "is a community where success multiplies rather than depletes, where one family achieving their goals creates a pathway for other families to achieve theirs." After the presentation and panel discussion concluded, The visitors toured the community center's various facilities: the classroom where financial literacy workshops took place, the childcare room that made attendance possible for parents, the career counseling office where people worked one-on-one with specialists. But Alejandro noticed that many of them seemed most interested in the less formal spaces. The bulletin board covered with community announcements and photos from program celebrations, the kitchen where participants often shared potluck meals after workshops, the children's corner where siblings entertained themselves while parents attended meetings. One visitor, a man named David who worked for a foundation that funded community development initiatives, lingered in the main hall after everyone else had moved on to the next stop. "Can I ask you something off the record?" he said. "Of course." "How do you sustain this level of personal investment? How do you avoid burning out when so much of your work depends on relationship building and emotional support?" It was a question Alejandro had asked himself frequently, especially during the early years when every success felt fragile and every setback felt like a personal failure. "I think," he said slowly, "it comes down to understanding that this work isn't charity. It's not something we do for people who are different from us. It's something we do with people who are part of our community, our extended family. But surely there are difficult days, moments when you question whether it's making a difference." "Absolutely. But those moments usually mean we need to step back and remember why we started. They usually mean we need better support systems for ourselves, or more sustainable approaches to the problems we're trying to solve." David nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you create those support systems?" "The same way we create them for program participants, through community, through relationships that extend beyond work, through celebration of small victories and honest acknowledgement of challenges." As if to demonstrate the point, Sofia appeared at Alejandro's elbow with a bottle of water and the gentle reminder that he had been on his feet presenting for 3 hours and might want to take a break. "This is what I mean," Alejandro said to David. "Partnership. Someone who knows when you need taking care of, even when you don't recognize it yourself." That evening, after the visitors had departed and the community center had returned to its usual weekend quiet, Alejandro and Sofia walked slowly through the neighborhood. Sofia's pregnancy was making the longer walks more challenging, but she insisted that the gentle exercise helped her sleep better. They passed the house that Isabella and Sofia now called home, its small front yard bright with flowers that Isabella had planted to celebrate their first spring as homeowners. They walked by the community garden that Mrs. Chen had successfully established, where several families were working together in the evening coolness to tend vegetables and herbs that would supplement their grocery budgets. "Do you think," Sofia asked as they paused to watch the gardeners work, "that our baby will take all this for granted? Will they assume that communities always support each other this way?" "Maybe. Is that bad?" "I don't think so. Maybe each generation should assume that the good things their parents had to fight for are just normal parts of life." Alejandro considered the wisdom in that perspective. His own mother had worn herself out fighting battles against poverty, against single parenthood, against a system that seemed designed to keep working families from getting ahead. She had fought those battles so that Alejandro wouldn't have to. Now he and Sofia were fighting different battles, against isolation, against the assumption that circumstances determined destiny, against the idea that community members couldn't solve their own problems if given appropriate resources and support. Maybe their child would grow up assuming that neighborhoods naturally organized job fairs and scholarship funds and asset-building programs. Maybe they would take for granted that success was something to be shared rather than hoarded. "I hope," Alejandro said, "that they inherit our work ethic, but not our sense of urgency. I hope they get to fight for even bigger dreams because we handled some of the smaller ones." "What do you think the bigger dreams look like?" Alejandro thought about the conversations he'd been having with other community development professionals, the research Sofia had been doing on policy advocacy, the young scholarship recipients who were starting to think about graduate school and professional careers that could influence systems rather than just navigate them. "I think maybe the bigger dreams look like changing policy instead of just creating programs. Like influencing the systems that create inequality instead of just helping individuals overcome inequality." Are you ready for that level of work? I don't know. But I'm getting ready to think about getting ready. Sophia laughed at the cautious phrasing that had become characteristic of how they approached major decisions. Carefully, collaboratively, with full recognition of their current capacity and constraints. As they turned toward home, they passed the elementary school where Alejandro had once sat on the playground, wondering if he would ever amount to anything. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed. Now he saw it as a place where future scholarship recipients were currently learning to read and dream about their possibilities. Their apartment building came into view, and Alejandro could see his mother moving around in her kitchen, probably preparing Sunday dinner that would serve as leftovers for most of the week. Some things remained beautifully, reassuringly constant. "I love you," he said to Sophia as they climbed the stairs to their front door. "I love you too. And I love the life we're building together. Even the uncertainty, even not knowing exactly what comes next. Especially the uncertainty. It means we're still growing." That night, as Alejandro lay in bed with one hand resting on Sophia's pregnant belly, feeling the small movements of the child who would soon join their family, he thought about the conversation he'd had with David about sustainability and burnout. The question had stayed with him because it touched on something he was still learning about long-term community work, how to maintain hope and energy for problems that couldn't be solved quickly or completely. But lying there in the darkness, surrounded by the sounds of a neighborhood where he had grown up and chosen to remain, where he had transformed pain into purpose and isolation into connection, Alejandro realized that maybe the question itself was based on a false premise. This wasn't work that required sustaining artificial enthusiasm for an abstract cause. This was life. This was home. This was family, both biological and chosen. The energy came not from trying to maintain motivation, but from being part of a community that nurtured and supported and celebrated each other through both struggles and triumphs. The hope came not from believing that all problems could be solved, but from witnessing daily proof that people could change, that circumstances could improve, that love and support could help anyone overcome challenges that might defeat them if faced alone. And the purpose came not from trying to save anyone, but from choosing every day to be part of something larger than individual success or failure. A community committed to ensuring that everyone had access to the resources, relationships, and opportunities they needed to thrive. As sleep finally came, Alejandro's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for his mother's unwavering faith, for Sophia's transformative love, for a community that had taught him that real wealth was measured not in individual achievement, but in collective well-being, and for the chance to pass all of these lessons on to the next generation, starting with the child who would soon be born into a family and community prepared to support them in becoming whoever they were meant to be. The story continued, as stories always do, in the daily choices that each person made about how to treat their neighbors, how to respond to other people's dreams, and how to use whatever resources and opportunities they had been given to create more resources and opportunities for everyone around them. Have you ever lived through or known someone who went through something similar? Have you ever watched someone transform pain into purpose, or been part of a community that refused to give up on its people? Think about the people in your own life who believed in your potential when you couldn't see it yourself. Think about the moments when you had to choose between bitterness and growth, between isolation and connection. Most importantly, think about the dreams that are still waiting for you to believe in them. The dreams that aren't too late, too small, or too ambitious. The dreams that could change not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. Because that's how real transformation happens. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the daily choice to see possibility where others see problems, to offer hope where others offer judgment, to stay and fight when running would be easier. If this story resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their circumstances don't determine their destiny, that their struggles can become their strength, that their story isn't over yet, because somewhere tonight, there's a young person sitting at a kitchen table, feeling defeated by life's challenges and convinced that dreams are for other people. There's a parent working multiple jobs and wondering if their sacrifices matter, There's a community that could be transformed if just one person decided to stay and fight instead of accepting defeat. Your story could be the inspiration they need to try again. Your voice could be the encouragement that changes everything. The diary closes, but the story continues. In every choice we make, in every person we help, in every dream we refuse to abandon. What will your next chapter say?